morning, Amyr.
Good morning, Simon. How are you?
Very well, thank you. Very well indeed.
Looking forward to another fireside chat with you.
Absolutely. Now, as a reminder, the first one was why you need a financial plan. The second one we did was effectively, let's just refer back to notes. How do you take an income from your investments or pension portfolio?
And actually, absolutely, now, a question we get all the time, isn't it?
Absolutely. And today it's a really quite an interesting topic, which is how much income can you safely take from your portfolio?
Yeah, I like this a lot. So we constantly are asked by clients to model different scenarios that might play out, or actually that they would just like to see if they could or could not sustain in retirement, as the case may be.
Yeah.
And I think what I think is interesting for us to do in this conversation, Simon, is to maybe highlight how we think about modeling a sustainable withdrawal or sustainable income from pension plans or from ISAs, from clients' portfolios, to get them to start thinking about all the little risks and intricacies that play out with each other and interact with each other throughout that whole retirement journey.
Absolutely, because the whole planning process is dynamic. It needs to change because client circumstances will change, their desires will change, what they want to achieve moves on over the years. So actually, what we're talking about now is a process that takes place each and every year with our clients, because we come back and we revisit the assumptions we've made, what the clients would like to achieve. So should we dive straight in? I've got a few slides here, once again, that we can have a quick look at. And I will just open those up for a moment. I'll go back to the beginning. So you can see that?
Absolutely, yeah.
Okay, so let's dive straight in. This one I've given the title of Financial Glide Paths. It's an analogy I use quite a lot with clients, and that will become self-evident as we go on. Now, one of the slides I often use when it comes to clients is this one here, which is a little bit like Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And the foundation's always the plan. Planning is the big deal, is it not, Amyr?
Absolutely. You know, Simon, I think we can say this pretty safely of pretty much every single one of our clients is they are all surprised at the amount of value they derive from the financial planning process that we take them through when they sign up to become clients of ours. Whereas the conversation almost always begins with a product-related query or a query around maybe the investments. And inevitably, we always steer the client to the plan first, then creating a sustainable retirement planning process, and only then looking at the products they have or the products they might need to be able to fund that plan. So this is paramount to our financial planning beliefs here at Holland Hahn & Wills.
Indeed, and we're often talking about some pretty complicated concepts, and our job is to translate that into simple English and a simple process of understanding as to what we're suggesting and why we're suggesting it. Hence this little presentation here. And I'm just going to use for a moment this slide to demonstrate, if you can, on the left-hand side on the x-axis is the portfolio, and running along the bottom on the y-axis is time, or your life ahead. And actually what we expect clients to do is for there to be a complete controlled depletion. In other words, we don't want clients to end up with huge amounts of money when they're dead and buried. We don't want clients to have a huge bank balance when they're not able to spend any of this money. What we want to encourage is for them to spend and enjoy money in their retirement to achieve all the things they want to achieve, but nevertheless leave a sensible amount for later days, because the fundamental issue we have for all of us is that we don't know how long we're going to live.
That's 100% right. And you know, this depletion that folks can see on the screen there, that graph that just keeps depleting over time until effectively it hits zero, that can also include legacy planning along the way, which is to actually be able to enjoy seeing your children or grandchildren enjoy the benefits of your hard work through gifting money or helping with education or what have you. So that whole conversation around what you are going to do with your money should actually make it a really tax-efficient journey and enjoyable journey of spending and gifting along the way.
Absolutely. So let's go back to this analogy of financial glide path. So imagine for a moment, during your working life, you've built up this portfolio, and it's a little bit like the glider has built up to a certain altitude. Now, once you've retired, you have a finite amount of capital, and we're wanting to project forward with this capital. And rather than the time ahead being this very flat, predictable, linear curve, in fact, we should expect something a little bit more like this. It's a bumpier ride because, as we know, with sequencing risk with the markets, there are good years, there are bad years, and we need to build in a buffer. We need to build in a fair amount of ability for the client to adapt and to change along the way.
Yeah, that's exactly it.
And what we're, I suppose, finishing off with this analogy, what we're ultimately doing is we are aiming towards the airstrip in future years. And this might sound pretty black and white, but it's not going to come as any surprise, or hopefully won't come as a surprise to anyone. But at some point in time, way down the line, it's going to happen to all of us. We're going to die. And if you want to make things absolutely binary, we will die either before or after our portfolio. Now, this leads us really just to two eventualities, and there are only two doors. And there's door A and door B, as we often talk about. And door A is that you pop your clogs before your portfolio, and door B is your portfolio dies before you do. And the outcomes are, again, pretty binary.
It's huge, isn't it, Simon? I mean, what we're talking about here is actually having the ability to enjoy a life full of dignity and independence in retirement, and really be mindful of the good you can do through helping your children and grandchildren through a meaningful legacy, and even to the causes that perhaps you care about. And that comes with planning. That does not come by mistake. And what comes by mistake, and unfortunately as financial planners we are only too aware of, is folks that go through door B, which is they find that they lose their independence, and there is a sense of loss of dignity throughout in retirement. And that ability to dream about a legacy of leaving their kids and grandkids better off than they were when they started on this journey, that dies too. And that's not an ideal place to be.
No, and it's something we're trying to guard against, absolutely guard against. So just scrolling through a little bit, then we come back to this glider. Glide paths are not linear. They need to be robust, they need to be dynamic, and they need to adapt to the changing circumstances. Now, financial models in times past, people either used to use something called the 4% rule. Sometimes they rely on what are called GAD rates, government actuarial department rates. But in recent times, the doors of pensions effectively have been thrown open, and folks are allowed to draw down at a rate that they choose. And the problem is that there are so many unknowns that there is, how do I put this, that there is a great possibility that a good percentage of those drawing down their own pensions will run out of money. It's as simple as that. And what we're here to do is to encourage them to spend in a sensible and logical manner over the years. So what do we do? Go on, Amyr, you were going to say, so I cut you off.
No, I just agree, Simon.
Okay. So we stress test the models. We start off with a cash flow planning, as we discussed in the previous little fireside chat that we did. Now, with that particular software, that assumes linear growth and linear inflation, and that simply means the same every year. So 5% growth, 3% inflation. In other words, we're assuming 2% real growth year after year after year after year, which in reality will never ever happen. So in fact, what we then do is we stress test, we take the data from the financial model and we pop it through something that's called a Monte Carlo simulator. Now, for those that haven't heard of Monte Carlo simulators before, yes, they were named after the town so famous for the casinos, and they were actually named after, also named by, and basically created by a pretty well-known mathematician who was involved with the Manhattan Nuclear Project. These days, Monte Carlo simulators are used by the Bank of England, they're used by engineers, by particle physicists. And in essence, what they do is throw a series of numbers and it follows what's called the Gaussian distribution. In other words, if you have a large enough numbers that you throw at a scenario using the correct interpretation, in this case, of the of the funds that we would be using and of inflation, what it then does, in essence, is create a bell curve, a good old-fashioned bell curve.
Yeah. In other words, what we're saying is, yes, if you relied solely on a projection that was just a straight line projection, in other words, if you did your own numbers and you said, look, I think inflation is going to be on average X, I think my growth rate given my portfolio mix is going to be Y, therefore I can predict the real rate of return like this forever. You actually might be right for a large percentage of the time, but there's still risk that you won't be right for another large percentage of the time. And you can see that bell curve shows that, yeah, the average scenario plays out prominently a lot of the time, but not always. And the problem is when the average scenario doesn't play out and you continue doing the same thing, that's when you can get into trouble with what's known as sequencing risk in your investment portfolio and your retirement income plan.
Indeed. And in fact, what we then do is we apply this principle to a client's portfolio and to their financial plan. As we can see here, the blue line is the most likely to happen, but there's a pretty large spread as to what options there could be in future. And this then just gives us a percentage likelihood of success. And this is a process, of course, we repeat each and every year. And this lets the client know statistically how robust their financial plan is. What we then do is to use historic data. Now, did you want to kick off with this one?
Well, yeah, I think it's important that folks realize that where we start with our financial planning, our retirement income planning models, is actually by looking at the weight of long-term history. And it's seeing how portfolios of various different mixes have performed or have behaved over 100 years, understanding all the events, all the potential geopolitical, inflationary, and other risks that have played out in history, and looking at the sensitivity of that retirement plan given those conditions, so that it can inform us about the sensitivities that we might need to be aware of going forward. So we're not by any means suggesting that history repeats itself, but we're saying that if we're going to use any guide to inform us about our assumptions for the future, surely it should be the historical weight of evidence that has been empirically tested and is there for us to at least stress test our model portfolios on.
That's right, indeed. And so what we're in essence doing is we're comparing the financial plan of the clients historically to show that had they retired in various times past. And so this, for instance, this red line here shows that what would have happened if that client had retired in 1969 and then received the growth rate for the next 35 years and inflation rate, whether or not they could have maintained their chosen lifestyle. And just as a general guide, that's roughly half of what they could have taken had they retired in 1980 and retired for the next 35 years. And so we're stress testing here using both Monte Carlo or random number distribution and historical data, which of course goes back through, well, the 70s oil crisis, the Second World War. We don't know what will happen in the future, but we are testing it with 100 years of pretty robust capital data.
Which is to say, isn't it, Simon, that what stress testing allows us to do is effectively run with our clients what I would term, just very colloquially as sort of safety boat drills. In other words, we, I think, and have been in a privileged position as financial planners, as a firm, Holland, Hahn & Wills, of not having any of our clients need to panic and have a knee-jerk reaction to the stock markets in this year of 2020, when we've had the big stock market shock around March and April because of the COVID health pandemic. And the reason why they didn't have to panic is because we've been doing these sort of lifeboat drills with them over the years. We have, with our clients, showed them what the situation would be in their financial plan if we were to find ourselves in the middle of an economic crisis of the sorts that we've seen before in history. And okay, this year, nobody could have ever predicted a health pandemic to the scale as what we're seeing with COVID, but we we do know, just as a fact, that the actual downturn that we saw in the markets, well, a violent downturn like that has happened in the past many times for many different reasons. So being able to do these life broke drills, being able to stress test against these downturns enables our clients to stick with the plan and also understand up front the sensitivity of their plan to these potential shocks. And thankfully, that means that they don't need to react, panic sell, and therefore they're still on track and they're still going through door A, as we showed a few slides ago. They are still on track to have the lifestyle they've aimed to have throughout all their working life. And they really are still planning for those legacy events and be able to leave their family and the institutions they care about with a meaningful legacy in the future.
Indeed. And just to reiterate, this is a process that we carry out every single year. So just scrolling forward and finishing off with the, the analogy of the glider, here we are with the instrument panel. And because we're meeting up every year, because we're discussing this every year, because we're stress testing each and every year, there are the controls. We can do a little bit of alteration of the trim or whatever it might be. And so rather than ever finding themselves in a dire situation, if we need to make a few changes along the way, we do so with lots and lots of advance notice. So there's never a shock.
Yeah, absolutely. So in other words, if you're out there planning your own retirement income strategy, managing your own portfolio, you would have seen us in previous videos talk about this business of a cascade cash flow management approach. In other words, how and where are you going to withdraw cash flow from to be able to fund your lifestyle? Well, we here at Holland, Hunt and Wills do that in many ways. We look forward and we make reasonable and reasoned assumptions as to how we expect a portfolio of a certain mix to behave in the future. But we do that informed by having a long-term perspective of the weight of history and seeing how different portfolios, different markets, different world events have moved and have affected portfolios in the past. And by having that combined conversation of looking forward, but also learning from the past, we feel that our clients are better informed about what they can do, the sustainability of their plans. And they're also better informed as to how to react or not, as the case may be, when real life stresses actually hit their portfolios.
Indeed. And so with the glide paths and with cascade cash flow management, what this allows us to do is to look at the portfolio and to look at the RRR, the required rate of return for the portfolio. We can look at their spending assumptions and the sustainability of their portfolio going forwards. We can look at inflation linking to make sure that it keeps up with the real buying power of money. And obviously, we're every year paying regard to the longevity of you as well as your portfolio. So let me just roll this over to the final slide. We'll stop the share, and I think that's probably us done for today, isn't it, Amyr?
Absolutely. There's a lot to think about there. There's a lot of ideas for clients to research further. And as always, if anybody that's listening and watching wants to discuss this further with either Simon or myself, just give us a call, send us an email, get in touch, and it will be a pleasure to speak with you.
We'll be absolutely delighted to. Thank you very much for watching, and speak to you again sometime. Amyr, thank you very much.
Simon.
Cheerio. Bye then.